Fred Banting and the Dury Quarry, September 2, 1918. A presentation by Michel Gravel. Sir Frederick Grant Banting was born in Alliston, Ontario in 1891. After completing his medical studies, he volunteered for the Canadian Expeditionary Force, and I believe he arrived at the front in August 1918 when he became medical officer of the 44th Canadian Overseas Battalion. He certainly participated in two battles, the DQ Line, September 2, 1918, and the Canal du Nord later in September. He was wounded by shrapnel on September 28, 1918 at the Canal du Nord, but remained at his post for 16 hours. He was awarded the Military Cross for his bravery. Apparently, he treated his own wound for fear his arm would have to be amputated. He was right-handed and his wound was in his right arm. Having no specialized training, he nevertheless isolated the insulin hormone in 1922 at the University of Toronto. He then shared the Nobel Prize for Medicine for his discovery in 1923 at age 32. He sold a patent for insulin to his university for $1. This was his gift to humanity. He was knighted by the king. Unfortunately, he died in an accidental plane crash in Newfoundland while on a scientific mission for the Allies. He was only 49. On September 2nd, 1918, Banting appropriated a German field hospital in the small and obscure village of Dury in France. I searched for the location of his aid station for 12.5 years. Special thank you to François Lepoint and Jean-Marie Dez, MSM. The story for me started around 2010 when I read the section on the Battle of the Drocourt-Quéant line, and specifically the fighting at Dury in the official history of the 44th Canadian Infantry Battalion. The title of the book is 6,000 Canadian Men. Banting was as I mentioned, the medical officer of the 44th Battalion on September 2nd, 1918. He doesn't really, I don't think, appear in the war diary that was put together in 1918. But by the time this book was published, he had won his Nobel Prize, so he was famous across Canada, so he is mentioned in the book. They do say he did good work on September 2nd, 1918. He was apparently recommended for the Military Cross, but this time he didn't get it. And he operated apparently a aid station in the quarries at Dury. Now, interestingly, in the book, there's a few pictures, and one of them is this shelled-in building with the roof collapsed. The caption is German Dressing Station Dury. They don't mention the quarry, but on the building, you can't read it on the slide, but it's painted the Hauptevebahnplatz. Not sure I pronounced that right, but it means main aid station. Anyway, this was clearly the German aid station at Dury. I want to give you an idea of what the Dury battlefield looked like. This is a photo of Mount Dury and the Dury-Villers Road. This is south of the village itself. This is the point of furthest advance by the 4th Canadian Division on September 2nd, 1918. And there was a terrible battle here for this road. In the distance, you can see or slightly see Dury Mill. I'll give you a zoom. This is a contemporary photograph taken by a soldier of the Canadian 87th Battalion, probably an illicit photo. It was taken shortly after the battle. This landmark would have been seen by every combatant in the Dury fighting. It's kind of the symbol of the battle. We're back at the Dury-Villers Road. This is closer to the Arras-Cambrai Road. It's a very deep sunken road, and you can see the havoc that was wrought here. This picture obviously was taken immediately after the battle, and this is what the sunken road looks like in modern times. Please indulge me while I give you a quick tour of Dury and what the soldiers would have seen or saw during the liberation on September 2nd, 1918. This is La Rue de la Bruyère, one of the main roads in the village, and you can see the magnificent pigeon coop survived the war. A lot of buildings surprisingly survived the war. This is what the area and the street looks like today. This is the church in Dury. before and shortly after the war. The picture on the bottom is what the soldiers would have seen when they entered the village on September 2nd, 1918. What's important though for this presentation are the agglomeration or the cluster of chalk quarries that were at Dury. This photograph is taken from the Arras-Cambrai Road, which is the main highway running south of Dury. I'm looking northeast here towards Dury, and that forest is actually the Dury quarries. The vegetation has overtaken the site, or most of it. This is a Google view of the little village of Dury. As you can see, it's not very big. There's only 400 to 450 people that live in the village. If I zoom in a bit, you'll see on the right Dury Wood, which I believe was there or semi-intact in 1918. And to the left of it is the Dury quarries. There's actually a whole bunch of quarries clustered together. The quarry was bisected by the Rue de Bapaume, the Bapaume Street that you can see that's bisecting the blue circle. On the right was a 60-foot deep quarry, or a series of quarries that have now all overgrown with trees. On the left, where the houses are, was a quarry as well, but a lot of it was filled in. And not to give the story away, this little house here will be important for the story. Now here's a trench map of the quarries in Dury Wood. On the right is what was left of Dury Wood. On the left is the cluster of quarries. And you can see on the trench map, both sides, they say they were 60 feet deep. Now here's an aerial photo from the 1950s, which is interesting. What's in the white square or rectangle there is the main part of the quarries, and they're not overgrown with trees yet. As you can see, the chalk actually coming through, and on the right is the Dury Wood. Here's a trench map of the Dury area. It's the left flank of the Battle of the Drocourt-Quéant one. I just want to explain the battle a little bit. You can ignore most of the red flags and the red numbers. That's meant for a book that's coming out in French in France in September. So the capture of Dury and Mount Dury was the responsibility of the 4th British Division and the 4th Canadian Division. Here in the circle is the quarries at Dury. Also, I will just point out point number 4 in red, the little flag. That's the Dury-Villers Road that I showed you pictures of. Point number 5 is where the Dury Mill used to be. So on the left, the 4th British Division had 2 assault battalions north of Dury, the Essex Regiment and the King's Own. They were attacking on the left of the Canadians, again to the north of Dury. On their right, the 10th Canadian Infantry Brigade of the 4th Canadian Division had 2 assault battalions in the front line on the morning of September 2nd, 1918. On the left, the 50th Battalion. On the right, the 47th. I believe, but I'm not sure, but I believe the 47th Battalion is likely the battalion that actually captured the quarries. Why I say that is their war diary mentions that they opened during the battle, they opened their battalion headquarters in the quarry. Surprisingly, I read over 35 war diaries, British and Canadian, 13 German sources, and 3 memoirs, one unpublished, and there's very little mention of the quarries. So it's a shame that we don't have a testimony of what exactly happened in the quarries. Was there fierce fighting? It's not really quite clear. It's too bad how much detail we've lost. But anyway, on the right of the 10th Canadian Brigade, there was the 12th Canadian Brigade, again of the 4th Canadian Division. They had 3 assault battalions in line to take Mount Dury. They were heading towards the Dury Mill and the sunken road, the Villers-Dury sunken road. On the left was the 85th Battalion, in the center the 38th from Ottawa, and on the right the 72nd from British Columbia. On their right was the 1st Canadian Division. They were the right portion of the Drocourt-Quéant line attack, and they were going they were heading towards the village of Villers and Cagnicourt. And down the Arras-Cambrai road, there was an interesting formation called the Independent Force, commanded by Brigadier General Brutinel. And it was a motorized force composed of Canadian and British armored cars, machine gunners, cyclists, and cavalry. And they were supposed to exploit down the road. It's an interesting story, but it's outside of the scope of this presentation. So anyway, after the they advanced to the edge of Dury, the 46th Battalion was of the 10th Canadian Infantry Brigade was to exploit through the 47th and 50th, take Dury, and just go beyond Dury, which they did. They reached a red line or flag, the flag number 11. Now, the last battalion of the 10th Canadian Infantry Brigade, Fred Banting's 44th Battalion, was tasked to exploit between Dury and the 4th British Division. So they were going to swing north of Dury and exploit to the second objective, which was the village of Raycourt. Unfortunately, they failed. They didn't get past the red line. So the red line actually was as far as the Canadians and the British got on September 2nd, 1918. If some of you people know the area, the second objective was Raycourt. The third objective was Oisy-le-Verger across the Canal du Nord. And the fourth objective, while it was a cavalry exploitation to Cambrai, which they had tried to do in November of 1917 and failed then as well. Anyway, this is as far as they actually got. Now, this is a photo of a quarry that my friend Jean-Marie Des found for me. It's probably from the Imperial War Museum, and the caption was Dury. So I'm pretty certain this is part of the Dury quarry system, and you can see how deep it is. And you see why I wonder why this isn't mentioned more in the war diaries. There must have been some fighting in here, but anyway. Now, just recently, I acquired 2 photographs from Germany. They might be unique photographs of a quarry, and the caption on the back was Dury in Artois. So anyway, here's the second one. And I asked my friend again, Jean-Marie Des, who lives nearby, I said, do you really think this is what the Dury quarry looked like during the war? He was pretty sure it was. You can see how well entrenched the Germans were in here with the temporary housing and those huge flights of stairs everywhere. But we'll get back to this picture. Well, I showed those pictures to another friend who lives near Dury, François Lepoint, and he said, I know of a picture that might help you out. It was taken probably near the quarry at Dury, and it was this one here. You can see this lone house, and on the right you can see the white chalk of the edge of the chalk pit. This turns out that it was the German field hospital that was in the 44th Battalion history. So there's the picture on the left from the 44th Battalion history. Obviously, it was sometime after the fighting of September 2nd, 1918, because the roof is caved in and there's a whole bunch of pock marks on shell marks on the building. But the photo on the right proves that the German field hospital that was featured in the 44th Battalion history was in fact in the quarry. That had never been proven before. So if we look at Google Earth, this is the street that goes to Dury, and on the right, this forested area was the quarry. So in 1918, that would have been an open pit. And then you see a suspicious looking, familiar looking building up here. And let me zoom in on it. Well, it's the German aid station. You can see the lean-to is still there. The roof has, of course, been rebuilt. They reparched all the masonry, and they plugged up some windows. But most of or some of the building has survived from 1918. So I contend that Banting almost certainly did not open a new aid station in the quarry. He would have appropriated what was probably a very serviceable German aid station. So anyway, so if we go back to my other picture of the quarry and you compare François Lepoint's photo, the building in the orange, he contends that the building in the orange circle up top is the German aid station, which became Fred Banting's aid station. Is this the right house? Well, what we know is the 44th Battalion official history states that Banting set up his aid station in the quarry. It also included a photo of a German field hospital somewhere at Dury, which we have now proved was in the quarry, thanks to François Lepoint. It stands to reason that Banting appropriated a perfectly good German aid station. Now, is this significant? Any find like this is cool, but I told my friends in France that finding Banting's aid station is like them finding Louis Pasteur's aid station. Now, this 12-year research project of mine is dedicated to my friend Mark Hagen, who was a victim of diabetes. The first time I visited the quarry at Dury, I had just found out that Banting had an aid station somewhere in there. I didn't know exactly where. Well, when I was in the quarry, I thought of Mark. I hadn't talked to him in about 5 years, but I said I got to call him to tell him I was at Dr. Banting's aid station. But unfortunately, I was still in France 2 or 3 days later, and I got a call that Mark had passed away. His mother found him in his apartment the day before, and it turns out that at the moment I was thinking about him at Dr. Banting's quarry, he had died in his bed. So it's a very moving thing for me, and I'm certain that Dr. Banting's aid post was destined to be found. And that's me and Mark in May 1984. Thank you very much for spending this 15 minutes with me.